Today we're going to finish up chapter 16. Really pretty much done except for the rise of new nations and nationalism. I had a professor that once said that nationalism is the strongest motivating force in history. It leads to endless wars. Most people describe nationalism as pure patriotism, love of country. But it's more than that. It's really a feeling of belonging to a people of society because you share the same language, you share the same religion, you share the same culture. And in this age of empires, what you had were many multi-ethnic empires, whether it was Russia with the various peoples inside of it, or Austria-Hungary, or the Ottoman Empire. People wanted to be ruled by people like them. They did not want to be ruled by some foreign power. So this is really going to lead to, for instance, in some cases like the German states, to unification. The idea that we're divided, we're going to be weak, other people are going to take advantage of us, but if we join together, nobody would ever be able to resist us, which unfortunately is going to lead into a couple world wars. But it also leads to, as I mentioned, a lot of conflict, where you see rebellions of places like, for instance, Greece in the 1820s against the Ottoman Empire, trying to gain their independence. And there's a lot of political uses of nationalism. I mean, we see them good and bad today. Sometimes it can be a good unifying force. The idea, for instance, during World War II, that we're all in this together and united, we're going to each do our part and achieve our goals. But of course, you can see it taking the other direction as well, which is pretty much how people like Mussolini or Hitler use nationalism to foster devotion and stifle any other type of dissent. So here in this picture you see Poland, who tried to use nationalism to break away from Russia. They actually won several battles against Russia, but in the end Poland would get crushed, and it led to a Polish exodus to places like the United States. But the two guys I want to talk about the most are Bismarck, who's the guy with the German helmet up top and a nice mustache, and Count Cavour of Sardinia. A lot of people don't know that Germany and Italy, though the Germans and Italians have been around for a millennium, are actually new countries, about 100 years newer or younger than the United States of America. Germany was really a collection of various German states like Bavaria or Saxony or Hesse or Hanover. There were so many of them. And because they were divided, they were often very, very weak. Napoleon was able to take over a lot of them in the 1800s, and he would create like a confederation of German states. And at the Congress of Vienna, which the Allies instituted at the end of the Napoleonic Wars, they began to try to consolidate the German states to counterbalance what was then a very powerful France. What they didn't realize is in the end, they'd be creating a more unstable force in a new united Germany. But that wasn't going to come about until really Prussia. Prussia was a very militaristic Eastern German state, and they would get a chancellor at this time by the name of Otto von Bismarck. And Otto worked for the Prussian king or Kaiser, William I. And Otto would use warfare, really, to defeat his enemies and kind of mold the Germans into one united state. The first war was against Denmark, which was just for two German states, Schleswig and Holstein, which was an easy victory. Next, he had to take on his fellow German state Austria, which long dominated the German states back in the day of the Holy Roman Empire. This was called the 7 Weeks' War and took place right after the U.S. Civil War and in the late 1860s. And in 7 weeks, Prussia, much like the Union, used railroads and industrialization to crush Austria. Now, during this time with the 7 Weeks' War, Bismarck went to Napoleon III, the Emperor of France, and said, hey, we need you to stay out of it. What's it going to take for you to stay out of it? And Napoleon said, well, I would like to have influence in these German states of Alsace and Lorraine. And so Bismarck, it's like, all right, put it down in writing, and we'll deal with it after the victory. Well, after he defeated Austria, Bismarck turned around and said, look, France wants German states. How dare France want to prey on Germans? It's only because we're not united. So he led the Third War, which was known as the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. And in this war, the Prussians showed their military might and crushed France. In fact, captured Napoleon III, and he had to abdicate, thus ending the Second French Empire. It's going to be kind of momentous in history because for the next, 40 years, France wants revenge. And it really helps lead into World War I. France is agitating for revenge against Germany. Plus, it was humiliating. Prussian troops occupied France. In fact, they took over the Palace of Versailles, and the new nation of Germany was created in Paris. And the documents were signed. Bismarck became the Chancellor of Germany. Germany became an empire, and Kaiser Wilhelm became the King of Germany. And this created the Second German Reich, as it was known, the Second German Empire. Of course, we all know what the Third Reich is. Italy's a little different. Again, it was once dominated by various outsiders, from Austria to Spain to even France. It would be a prime minister of Sardinia, Count Cavour, who's going to lead the unification of Italy. He gets a lot of help. First of all, he was smart enough to ally himself with Prussia, especially against Austria, which allowed him to take Venice and other regions from Austria. But in the south, Giuseppe Garibaldi, who would be known as the Liberator, would liberate Naples and Sicily, which was called the Kingdom of Two Sicilies, and instead taking over as the new king, he united it with Garibaldi's portion of Sardinia and Piedmont. This was all part of Risorgimento, which was kind of resurgence of Italian nationalism, really led by young people, Young Italy movement. In the end, Italy would become united, and they would have a king, Victor Emmanuel II, who was king of Sardinia. So Italy and Germany, two new, I guess you could call them Central European powers, really start changing the dynamic of Europe. Last part of the revolution we want to talk about is the rise of feminism. Now, feminism had been around for a long time, but it starts to lead towards more suffrage, which is, of course, women's rights. The Enlightenment attack on tradition gave way to women attacking the idea that laws should be different for men and women. Even in this country, up until, many decades ago, but early 1900s, the laws treated men and women different. For instance, men would legally be adults at 21, women at 25, which doesn't make sense when you think about women maturing faster, but a lot of it had to do with, protecting women, especially fathers protecting daughters. So the whole idea that women needed to be protected was something that feminists needed to argue against. One English feminist by the name of Mary Wollstonecraft wrote something about the vindication of the rights of women. And one of her emphasis was that women were being denied the same education as men. And therefore, they were no longer, or they were not able to achieve an equal status with men. So her argument was that women, to be better wives and mothers, and even to be even somewhat independent, needed better education. In the United States, prior to the Civil War, was the Seneca Falls Conference, which was really the first feminist gathering in the United States. It was really gathered for the abolition of slavery. It was right before the Civil War. But there, a woman by the name of Sojourner Truth, who was a former slave, gave a speech. She's like, you're talking about the emancipation of slaves. What about the emancipation of women? So eventually this is going to lead to suffrage and increased opportunities for women in the workforce. The suffrage movement really isn't successful until I think New Zealand is the first country to give women the right to vote. The first state in the United States to give women the right to vote is Wyoming. But there was a lot of opposition to the role of women, and it didn't just come from conservatives. Many liberals as well were opposed, thought it would change the social dynamic. But feminism would spread from, say, Great Britain and the United States throughout the rest of the world. And eventually, as you can see, the right for women to vote, the right for women to have equal pay for equal work, these are big issues. In fact, lately, feminism hasn't so much, of course, dealt with suffrage. It's more with economic opportunity. And so that pretty much sums up this chapter.